let's move on to our final story of the day. If you guys don't have anything else to add, so our final story of the day. Um, this was actually born out of a conversation that I had with you, Tristan, earlier about trickle down economics and why has the GDP increased while the poor have seemingly gotten poorer, and all that stuff, right? So I think and there's a nice segue at the end that ties it to Bitcoin, of course. But I mean, maybe we'll have a discussion about whether or not I'm just like kind of hitting everything. Like if I have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, or do I have some valid points? So we can discuss all of that. But to start today's story, I want to talk about these sand divers in Cameroon. So I'm not sure if you guys know, but we're running out of sand on this earth. So I know that might comes as a shock to you because you're like sand is everywhere. Like how could we be running out of sand? But not all types of sand are useful. That's the kind of crux of the problem. Where to make concrete, you need like some special types of sand that's like just the right amount of coarseness so that it'll hold together when you mix it into concrete. So this special region in Cameroon, where it's along this river, that produces apparently the best sand in the region to make concrete. So what happens is that these men they go out on these big canoes, these big boats, essentially, and then they just dive into the water with these like steel buckets, and then they just scoop up buckets of this sand to sell it. And apparently, this is more profitable for them to do than fishing. So, like this sand, like they can make more money from selling this sand than from fishing. So the issue though is that well, there's a lot of issues. Obviously, they don't get paid a lot. They get paid the equivalents of about 12 USD a day. So not 12 USD per hour, 12 USD per day. And this work is extremely dangerous because they're just swimming in a river, and there's currents in the river, and you could easily drown if you're not a strong swimmer, or if you like after lifting the bucket all day, like it's like super heavy, right? Because you're lifting giant bucket full of sand, and if you get tired and get swept away by a wave or something, it's yeah, you could like easily die from doing this. So this is a very dangerous job for very little pay by our standards, but it's enough for them to kind of just sustain themselves. And yeah, basically they can bring about an average worker can bring about 9 tons of sand, wet sand, back to the shore on a full days of work, which is very impressive because that weighs about the equivalent of 2 African elephants. So that's how much sand they get, like they scoop up per day. And why I bring up this story is because we're kind of seeing maybe a less extreme version of this play out in like other countries, in like developed countries like Canada, the US, Europe, places like that, where it seems like, like we're working harder and harder as time goes on, but technology improves and GDP goes up. So like I don't know, every quarter we're seeing these GDP reports come out of like both Canada and the US, and it's like we haven't been in a recession since like that brief stint in 2020 because of the pandemic. But besides that, like we haven't been in a real recession since 2008. So every quarter has been pretty much positive, right? And GDP just goes up like at like a 45-degree angle if you chart it. But it seems like people are working for longer hours and people are working for less pay in terms of purchasing power, right? Like maybe the nominal amount goes up, but the purchasing power decreases. And yeah, it just seems like society is getting richer, but only for the elites. And kind of there's a huge class of people that are like on the bottom, like the lower class or the lower middle class, that are just getting left behind. And yeah, basically, like this is kind of my theory as to why this is happening and like what is happening, why this is happening and what can we do about it, right? So as you guys know, I wrote a book on Bitcoin, and this is the segue into the Bitcoin section. So in my book, I talked about something called the axiom of money, which is, in case you guys forgot, because I'm sure you guys all read my book, right? Is that the axiom of money is work or some other tangible effort must be expended to create new money, or else the money becomes meaningless. What I mean by that is, okay, so let's just look at what happened in 1971. So this is like a very famous website in the Bitcoin space. If you guys never been on this website, is WTF happened in 1971.com. And they have all these great charts, right? So you can see that that arrow points to the point where the US left the gold standard. And before the US left the gold standard, compensation, which is wages, and productivity, which is GDP, they were growing neck and neck. And then after the US left the gold standard, immediately it started diverging. And then you can see that the next chart is about the price of Campbell's condensed soup. So if you want to measure it, if you want to measure the cost of something in like an actual like food item that has intrinsic value, this is actually like a great measure, right? It's kind of like the Big Mac index, if you guys have heard of that. But anyways, you can see that basically the price of Campbell's soup didn't really like even move between like 1900 and 1971. And then immediately after around like the 1974-75 point, it started going up, and it's never looked back since. And if you need more evidence that something funky happened in 1971, look at the cumulative inflation rates between 1913 and 2015. This is only what's graphed, and of course we're in 2024 now, so there's a lot more inflation that this chart is not showing that has happened since 2015. But if you just look at this chart just till 2015, you can see that there's a huge kind of inflection point where inflation just took off after the US left the gold standard. So why is that the case? Well, let me go back to the axiom money that I just talked about a minute ago, which is that work must be expended to create new money, or else the money becomes meaningless. So when you have a piece of gold, somebody needed to dig that piece of gold out of the ground, refine it, and cast it into a coin or a bar or whatever, right? And that effort is very non-trivial because gold is very rare, right? So it's hard to find. And it's hard to find enough of it to put it into a coin. So if you have a gold coin, that means that somebody went through the effort of finding enough gold and went through the effort of minting it and casting it and purifying it and all that stuff. And if you run out of gold, let's say like you work for a boss that pays you in gold, and then the boss like goes bankrupt and he just has no more gold left, then he can't pay you, right? He can't just snap his fingers and make gold appear out of thin air. And like if you're bankrupt, you're bankrupt. But what happened with fiat money, which is the money that we have right now, just paper money, is like it takes no effort to create new money, right? So the government just snaps their fingers, they create new money out of thin air, and then they pay you with it. So that enables the government or the central bank, in cases where it's like Canada, the U.S., developed world, we all have central banks. The central bank can just snap their fingers, create more money out of thin air, and then give it to people. And then what happens is that dilutes the purchasing power that everyone else has, who already has their money saved in fiat dollars, right, in fiat cash. So that's what we know as inflation. So this is the case because fiat money violates the axiom of money again, right? So like it takes them no effort to create that new money. So how does Bitcoin come into this? Well, Bitcoin has the proof of work, like security, right? So you need to expend a massive amount of electricity to create new Bitcoin, which is in accordance with the axiom of money. And in fact, is better than gold, because what if we find some way of mining gold that's more efficient than before, right? What if we like unlock the technology to mine asteroids. Then we can mine gold a lot. We can get a lot more gold, super easy. And then the difficulty goes down, and there's no way to make it harder. And then gold will collapse in value in that scenario, right? Versus with Bitcoin, you can the algorithm adjusts the difficulty automatically. With my point is that if we have a form of money that actually costed somebody like anyone effort to create more of it, then that is the key that we need to like unlock to kind of bring productivity and compensation neck and neck, right? And this is what enables people to save, so that they can be relatively assured that whatever money they make at their work, it doesn't get diluted, right? So back to the example of the Cameroon divers, they get paid, I assume, in their local currency. I think it's called the Central African franc, CAF, right? So if they get paid in the franc, then the franc is a fiat currency. So if the government issues more francs and then spends them, then that causes inflation. So they already don't make a lot of money in the first place, and they're just trapped in this cycle, right? And they can never actually build enough wealth, because every time they build a significant amount of wealth, even if they could save some money, it just gets diluted. Whereas if they saved in Bitcoin, then that money is not dilutable, because again, Bitcoin is it takes the proof of work to make more Bitcoin, and also Bitcoin has that 21 million hard cap. So this is kind of like my thesis on how we can fix issues like what we're seeing around the world, where all these people that are working super tough jobs, super dangerous jobs, are just kind of stuck in their bad jobs for the rest of their lives because they could never save. And I think that that's the reason why like Bitcoin is so important, and this is why I'm so like invested and involved in this space.